Sebelum bertugas di kantor pengacara Amerika Serikat, Ibu Kavita adalah pengacara pengadilan di Departemen Kehakiman, Divisi Perdata, Seksi Tindak Pidana Penipuan, di mana dia menyelidiki dan menangani perkara kasus penipuan terkait perawatan kesehatan dan penipuan terkait pengadaan barang dan jasa. So wow, this is really wonderful experience. So it is an honor to have you. And again, give applause to Ibu Kavita. So I think I will do screen share from this part. And you have my pointer, right? Okay. Let me share screen. Yes, this slide is in Bahasa Indonesia. But if you would like to have the English translation, please just drop me a message, just one of you, because we have 2 classes in this session. And I will give you the English translation, but don't worry, maybe after, if you feel that I need to translate, just you can stop and ask me to translate. Okay, yeah, okay. So, thank you Mbak. Luar biasa ini. Ya, oke. Saya go green Mbak, saya pakai ini ya. Oke. Oke. Ibu Kavita saya ambilin. Is this yours? You will have this. Okay. So now I think you can start, and I think we will have like an hour or maybe just 50 minutes maximum. If you want to present, you can directly ask to the students if you would like to. Okay. Yes. Ada yang membutuhkan translation nggak? I think they are very confident. Okay, this is smart students everywhere, okay? HP-nya saja iPhone semua, jadi sudah pasti nggak butuh translator. Gitu ya? Oke, makasih. Please.
Selamat sore, siang, sore. Sore. Can you hear me or do I need the microphone? Microphone? Okay. My name is again Kavita Babu. I am here from Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. I recently came to Jakarta a month ago. So I'm working in the US Embassy at the Office of Overseas Prosecutorial Development Assistance and Training. I work with Ibu Ade. Ade, will you stand up? Ibu Ade and I, along with my colleagues, Pak Bruce Miyake and Ibu Tomika Patterson, all the 3 of us are resident legal advisors. We do capacity building with prosecutors, police, and judges in Indonesia. The 3 of us work in counterterrorism, trafficking in persons, anti-corruption, crimes against children, what else? Cyber, fraud, narcotics, money laundering, all sorts of criminal cases that happen in Indonesia. We try and work with local police, prosecutors, and judges. Let me see. Okay, should I point it here, Buck? Okay. So this describes OPDAT. The office was created in 1991, and we have an office, of course, in Jakarta in Indonesia, but we are also all over the world. There are offices in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, in Malaysia, Sri Lanka, no longer in Burma. We are in Hong Kong, Bangladesh, Nepal. We also have offices in China and then also throughout Africa, Europe, and South America and North America. So there are prosecutors like myself who work all over the world, and we work with, in Ibu Ade's case, Indonesian professionals who know the system and know the host country, and they help the resident legal advisors that work in each country. And so this is one of the programs that Optat did previously, and we offer projects and programs that are tailored to each of the organizations that we work with, including the police and the prosecutors. And so, as I said, we do terrorism, corruption, trafficking in persons, narcotics, and one that I did not mention was also environmental crimes. So wildlife trafficking, different types of environmental crimes. My second week in Indonesia, we did a program in Labuan Bajo, and I got to meet a Komodo dragon. And Pak Bruce, who is not here, thought it would be funny if you all saw this photo of me. As I said before, I am from Chicago, Illinois. That is my city. And, oh, that is Pak Bruce again, included that photo of Ibu Ade. And Ibu Ade, could you please tell the students sort of your path, and then I will explain to them my path to how I got here.
So, as Ibu Kavita mentioned before, Opdat was established in 1991, but in Indonesia it started in 2005 or 2006. So we've been here for about 16 years or more. And it started with just one legal advisor, and then it developed to 3 resident legal advisors at the moment. And I joined Opdat in 2009. Before that, I was working at the political section at the U.S. Embassy also. So I was in my portfolio, I did analyzing the terrorism networks and trafficking in persons. Then I moved to Opdat and doing the same thing. So my portfolio is terrorism, trafficking in persons, and at the time I was also doing like asset forfeiture and money laundering and a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Ade. So as I mentioned before, I am a lawyer. I'm a federal prosecutor in Chicago. So I am a criminal prosecutor, as Pak explained. Primarily the crimes that I prosecute in Chicago are violent crimes. So murder, sexual assaults, trafficking in persons, crimes against children. Most crimes against children federally are online exploitation of children, so child pornography, cases like that. I also do financial crime cases, so fraud, embezzlement, healthcare fraud cases. And then most recently, I worked with younger new prosecutors as they came into the office, and I was one of their supervisors. So today I've been asked to explain sort of very high level the American legal system. But as I said to all of you, I've only been in Indonesia for 1 month, so I don't know much about the Indonesian system. So I hope as I talk, I'm going to ask all of you to explain the Indonesian system to me. So I'll ask for volunteers, and if no one volunteers, I will just call on someone, if that's okay. Okay. So first, let's, what do you all know about the law in the US? Does anyone know how many justices sit on the Supreme Court in the United States? Yes, correct. Does anyone know what the 3 sources of law are in the United States? These are all questions that I will answer later. So, is the United States a civil or common law system? I heard it somewhere in the back.
Yeah.
Yes. Does anyone know what the term voir dire means? It's a Latin term. Has anyone heard the term voir dire before? Okay. I will explain that as well. And then does anyone know how you become a lawyer in the US? Okay, we'll talk about that too. Before I continue, how many students want to become lawyers here? Can you raise your hands and show me?
Siapa yang ingin jadi pengacara bisa? Nggak mau jadi pengacara.
No one wants to
No
be a
one?
lawyer.
They want just to
Smart,
be one
very
husband
smart.
and wife at home.
You're all studying you're studying law currently, correct?
Yeah.
Why are you studying law then? What do you all want to be? Do people want to be judges?
Ada yang ingin jadi hakim? Nggak
You-
ada. Terus jadi
No?
apa lu?
Do you want to become prosecutors?
Jaksa?
How many
Don't be
people want to become prosecutors? Okay, 1, 2.
Two.
Do you want to become police?
Polisi?
No. What else is left?
Army? Sambo? Nggak mau?
Do you know yet? Do you know what you want to be? You do. What do you want to be? Politician. Ah, okay. Anyone else? Adek?
Ada yang mau? Kalau nggak mau jadi polisi, hakim, jaksa, terus jadi apa? Penasaran saya. Bapak rumah tangga? Yes? Apa kamu? Yes? You?
You don't know? I'm sorry?
Practitioner?
Entrepreneur?
Entrepreneur?
An interpreter.
Mhm.
Good. Anyone else? Everyone else is just studying law because it's interesting? Yes? Okay. Okay, so first, we'll talk about a general overview of the sources of law, the general judicial system, and then how a criminal case happens in the US. And if you have questions, please just raise your hand and either Pak can translate for me, or if you want to ask a question in English, I can also answer it. So the United States Constitution is our primary source of law in the US. It was signed in 1787, I believe. It sets out the different branches of the government. We have the executive, which is the president and all of the agencies. The legislature, which is Congress. So it's the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then the judiciary. Can someone tell me in Indonesia, what are the different branches? Anyone?
Ada yang bisa menjelaskan di Indonesia organ-organ lembaga negara itu terbagi dalam berapa saja dan apa saja? Yuk, masa nggak tahu, tak suruh ngambil kuliah semester 1 lagi loh ini. Yudikatif, eksekutif. Yang mewakili siapa? Yuk, yes. I like you. Yuk, nanti tak kasih coklat. I have chocolate for him. Yeah. Oh, okay. Terima kasih, Mas. Yeah, good. Enggak, just name. Yeah, stand up, speak up about your name.
First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Dano. And in our system, we have three main. The first is executive. It's the same like US, the president, and then we have the legislative. Containing people representative, council, and the last one is judicative, is
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court.
We have Indonesian Supreme Court, House of Representative, and the President as the top level of the executive. I have chocolate for you. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, the microphone is also bonus for you.
Thank you. So as I explained, this is the same in the US. So we have legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. And similar to here, we have in the Congress, we have the House of Representatives and the Senate. There's a Supreme Court, and then in each district, we have multiple different district courts and a court of appeals. So the judiciary is the lowest level is the district court. Then there is Court of Appeals, and then there is the Supreme Court. To make it even more confusing, there is also a separate court system for each state. So in the US, oh, I think it's a different slide. Okay, I'll get to it. So in the US, there are 50 states, correct? Each state has its own court system. So I'm come from the state of Illinois. In the state of Illinois, we have the Supreme Court of the state of Illinois. Then underneath that, we have the appellate court of the state of Illinois. Then you have circuit courts. And then below the circuit courts, you also have county courts. So cases can be charged in state court, or they can be charged in federal court. And it's called the federal system. In Indonesia, does Indonesia have a federal system? No, correct. Okay, so it's a little, and the two systems, they stay apart until there are some cases that will go all the way to the state Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court of the United States will be the final decision. So the Supreme Court of the United States can decide state cases, but otherwise the two courts say completely different. Another source of law are statutes. So similar to Indonesia, Congress in the United States creates the law. They will debate, write a law, pass the law, and then the law will become enacted in what's called the United States Code. And then the executive branch, the president and all of the agencies underneath the executive branch are tasked with enforcing it. So me as a criminal prosecutor, one of my responsibilities is to enforce federal criminal law. So federal criminal law in the United States covers all sorts of things. It covers narcotics, it covers counterterrorism, it covers human trafficking or trafficking in persons, it covers cyber, it covers hacking, it covers intellectual property. And then there are other random things that are federal laws. If you steal someone's identity, if you use credit card skimmers, that's federal. That's a federal crime. If you threaten someone over the internet, if you use social media, if you use TikTok or Snapchat or Facebook to threaten someone, that is a federal crime. There are all sorts of different federal crimes. And so federal crimes then are enforced by the executive branch. The final type of law is executive orders, which are the president will sign into law. So they are directed to the agencies, and then agencies enforce what the president has deemed to be the law. Are there similar sources of law in Indonesia? Can the president make executive orders in Indonesia?
Apakah presiden bisa membentuk undang-undang di Indonesia? Yuk,
Does anyone
siapa?
know?
Another coklat? Yuk,
Anyone?
ayo. Wah, gampang banget ini. Yuk. Do you think that Indonesian president also can make the statute or law? Yang duduk belakang lah, daripada main HP. Yuk. Just to check my student to focus. Yuk, Indonesia bisa bikin peraturan nggak presidennya? Bisa. Ya. Dengan persetujuan dari DPR. Iya, tapi presiden sendiri bisa bikin peraturan atau undang-undang. Bisa. Caranya membuat peraturan pemerintah pengganti undang-undang. Ya. Okay. He said that it can be but it must be then again to submit it to the House of Representatives
So the
to
president,
be legalized. Yeah.
the president can make a law, but then the legislature, House of Representatives has to consider it and then they pass it. Ah.
Only for certain conditions.
Okay, this next slide is irrelevant to everyone here because no one wants to be a lawyer, correct? Is that right? Oh, there's one lawyer, okay. So in the US, it's 4 years of undergraduate. So everyone here is an undergraduate, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, no? And graduate? Both. Oh, okay. So US, 4 years of undergraduate, then 3 years of law school, and then each state has a separate exam. So I took the exam in Illinois. I'm bar, I have a license to practice law in the state of Illinois and in Washington, DC. But because we have two systems, we have federal and state, I can also practice in any federal court in the United States. So you have to pass the exam. And then once you get a law license or you pass law school, you can do anything, really. So I became a prosecutor. I have a friend who no longer practices law and she got her PhD in psychology and she's now a child psychologist, but she also is a lawyer. I have another friend who got her MBA and she runs a business. I have a friend who works in public relations for Congress. So people go to law school in the United States, get the law degree, and then some become lawyers like me, and some become something else. They go into business, they go into politics, what else do? They do all sorts of things, or they don't do the law at all and leave it behind and get some other degree completely. So lawyers, like here, often people go to law school and then, or learn legal, or go to legal classes and then don't ultimately become a lawyer. We talked about this. This is the structure of the different courts. So there's the federal court and then the state court. And in Indonesia, it is only there's one system, correct? There's the Supreme Court, and then there are district courts, high court, and then there are district courts that are regional throughout, correct? Has anyone been to the regional court in Jogja to see it?
Apakah ada yang pernah?
Not Ibu Ade or Pak Chris.
Yeah.
Anyone else? You have? I think no.
Apakah sudah pernah mengunjungi Pengadilan Negeri Yogyakarta atau di Sleman atau di Bantul? Belum pernah? I think they were, but only in our moot court rooms.
In
In the faculty
okay.
building, ya. Tapi
Okay.
kalau di ruang peradilan semua pernah ya? Oke.
So this is the map I was mentioning before. So there are 11 circuits and each circuit has a court of appeals. So the biggest circuit is the Ninth Circuit, partly because in the states of Montana, Idaho, maybe just Montana and Idaho, there are very few people, but there are many, many people in California. And so the Ninth Circuit has the most states, and it's therefore the biggest, but it's also equal, I would say, probably in population to the Second Circuit, which is New York. And so New York has also a large population. Illinois is in the center in the Seventh Circuit. Texas is at the bottom in the Fifth Circuit. And then you can see the different circuits throughout. And each circuit can make its own law. So if two circuits have disagreeing laws about the same issue, that issue then goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court then decides. They become the tiebreaker. So sometimes issues will come up where the Ninth Circuit will say one thing and the 11th Circuit will say something different. The case then goes to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court decides which is right. And that becomes the law of the land. Yes. Yes. So this is a very technical example, but the first example that pops to mind, there's a criminal law in the US that someone who is a felon, who has previously been convicted of a crime, they cannot possess a gun. They can't have ownership or have in their possession in any way a gun. the law now requires that that person, that the government, excuse me, has to show that they knew that they were convicted, that they knew that they were a felon. Before 2 years ago, that was not the law. Because in the Ninth Circuit, they found that yes, the government has to prove that the defendant knew that he was a felon, and the 11th Circuit said, no, you don't have to know that. So then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court then decided that yes, the government has to prove that the defendant knew he was a felon when he possessed the gun. So that they decide very, very sort of detailed issues like that. So I'm going to shift a little bit to talk more specifically about the courts. So within the courts, there are multiple different types of authorities. So there's the US Constitution, which I mentioned. There are court rules and court procedures, which are similar to the court rules, and then also agency regulations. So the agencies are all under the executive branch. So there's the Department of Education, much like the Ministry of Education here, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Women Empowerment. There are multiple different departments in the United States. Like I work for the Department of Justice. Each of those departments or agencies has its own regulations. Those regulations are also authorities that the court has to follow. And then the one thing that I think is very different in the US versus the way law is made here is courts can make law. So when they make when the court makes a decision, that law becomes binding on the other courts around them. So when the Seventh Circuit makes a decision and says that everyone must wear orange going forward, if that just saying is like a silly example, if everyone must wear orange, then that becomes the law in the Seventh Circuit. So all of the courts in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana, the 3 states in the Seventh Circuit, they must follow the law that the court has set from before. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? And that's the idea of stare decisis. So that is a legal term saying that a previous decision is binding upon the next court. So they have to follow the rule that the previous court has made. The judiciary, our judges are all made up in the way that the Constitution envisioned, which is Article 3 of the Constitution. The Constitution has, I believe, 5 articles, and then the Bill of Rights, which you may have heard of. I asked this of everyone earlier when we were meeting, but has everyone heard of Law and Order? The show Law and Order? Some people? What other shows are here? CSI here? What other American legal shows are here?
House of Cards.
House of Cards. Oh, that's a very poor portrayal of the United States. Well, it's sometimes just as crazy. Suits. Suits. So there are often you'll hear in television shows the police will say to a defendant, you have the right to remain silent. If you choose not to be silent, anything you say can be used against you. That idea comes from the Constitution, from the Bill of Rights. It's the right against self-incrimination, which comes from the Fifth Amendment. You also will hear that you have a right to an attorney. If you've ever heard that in a TV show, you have a right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. That also comes from the Bill of Rights. And then the Supreme Court has added upon that, and in a famous law called Miranda v. Arizona, where they said that if you are poor in the United States and you are charged with a criminal act, you have the right to an attorney. And so every person in the United States charged with a crime has an attorney through the entire process. So even if you can't afford one, you are given what in the United States is called a public defender. Judges in the US federal judges are appointed, so by the president, and they're confirmed by the Senate. State judges are often elected. So there are elections and judges can run and be elected to become judges in the state. How do people become judges in Indonesia? Did anyone here want to be, I think no one wanted to
Di
be a judge.
Indonesia, cara memilih hakim di Mahkamah Agung atau di pengadilan negeri seperti apa? In bahasa, no problem, don't worry. Ayo. Ya. Ya. Ayo. Ayo, pede aja pakai bahasa Indonesia nggak apa-apa. Pakai bahasa Jawa ya ora apa-apa. Asal jangan bahasa Melayu. Yuk. Ya Mbak, jangan malu. Yes, silahkan. Good. Bahasa Indonesia nggak apa-apa.
There will be a test before he can became a judge. There will be a test, and then he become a candidate of judge, and then he became a judge.
And then you become a district judge,
According, yeah.
and then you move up. How do you move up?
Yeah. It depends on his
Or
work,
her.
I think.
Or her, correct? Yes.
Yeah, career.
Okay. Makasih. Oh, yes, please.
Dari Bu Aroma ini. Kata saya gebuk, ya gebuk ya Pak.
So similar to Indonesia, the US system has criminal courts, civil court, and then administrative court. So I think that is the same here. And again, similar to here, there's an adversarial system. Does everyone know what adversarial means?
Ada yang tahu apa itu maksudnya sistem adversarial? I think it's new
No.
here.
Means like
Yeah.
you're fighting, but in a very professional, calm way. So the government is on one side, defense is on one side. In the civil case, the plaintiff and the defendant is on the other side. In an administrative case, I guess it's the government on one side and I don't know what it's called, the administrative side, what the other person is called, the individual. But not competition is not the right word, but you are competing and in conflict. And this is a way for both sides to present their arguments to the judge, or in the US, in criminal and in civil cases, we have a jury system. So the jury system does not exist in Indonesia, correct? Does everyone know what the jury system kind of looks like? Has everyone seen it on TV or in movies? And I think your moot courtroom has the jury box, correct? And so that in criminal systems, and that's what I know best, in the criminal system, the jury is selected at the beginning of a trial, and I'll talk sort of very generally about what a trial will look like. And we can talk about that phrase I used at the beginning, voir dire, and how that is used when we pick a jury. These next two slides, we talked about this. There's two courts, federal court and the state court. And again, this is the two systems. So this is the criminal process. There are many similarities between the way the system works in Indonesia and the way the system works in the US. We have, just like you do, we have the police. Let's see. Oh, too far, sorry. Yeah, so this is the Bill of Rights that I was speaking about before. So these are all of the rights that are included in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. So a speedy trial, every trial has to happen within 70 days of someone being charged. So if Pak is arrested in the United States for fraud. From the day he is arrested and a criminal complaint is charged, the government has 70 days to bring the trial. There are exceptions that the judge can say, because both the defendant and the government agrees that this time should be excluded. So sometimes trials will happen 2 years later because both parties agree that the defendant needs time, the defendant's lawyer needs time to review all of the materials. So then the trial will happen later. But if the defendant says, I want a speedy trial, the trial must happen within 70 days of their being arrested. That's partly because sometimes the defendant will be detained. So upon arrest, if it was say Pak did not commit fraud, but Pak murdered someone. Because it's a violent crime, the defendant will then be detained and be kept in custody because the judge will determine that he could be a danger. So then you don't want, in the US, we are concerned about someone being in jail and being detained for a long period of time. And then if at trial, the jury may find that they were not guilty. So then that person has spent many, many years in jail. And ultimately a jury has found that they did not commit the crime. And so therefore we want any defendant who's been charged with a criminal case for them to have a trial as quickly as they want to have the trial. Similarly, defendants have the right to an impartial jury. That means that the jury should not have bias. They say that you're being judged by 12 of your peers, meaning 12 people that come from the same community as you. So the people in the jury can be plumbers, they can be construction workers, they can be farmers, they can be executives, they can be students, they can be professors. They come from all walks. They can be homemakers, they can be mothers, they can be grandfathers, anything. A jury is diverse. It should be diverse and it should look like the community the court sits in, and it should be impartial. A right to counsel I talked about. Everyone has the right to an attorney. The right against self-incrimination. That means that you cannot be forced to make a statement. You have the right to be silent. That includes a trial. Double jeopardy. That is, I think that's one thing that's different from Indonesia and the United States. In Indonesia, or in the United States, if you are found not guilty, if you are charged with robbery, and you go to trial and the jury says, Ibu Kavita did not commit this robbery, she is not guilty, the government can't try again. That's it. There's no appeal. The government has lost. The government cannot try to convict me again or charge me with that same crime again. So that's double jeopardy. The right against illegal search and seizure is another right that's in the Constitution. The Fourth Amendment says that the government must have a warrant to search either a person or their home or their telephone. And I believe the police in Indonesia also need to have a warrant. Correct. So there's a requirement to have a warrant. The one difference in the US is that if the police or the FBI or whoever in the US does not have a warrant and searches, say, my house, if they don't have a warrant and there's no exception, anything they find in the house, say they search my house and they find 3 kilos of illegal drugs. If they don't have a warrant and there's no exception, the police cannot use that evidence. The courts say that because they have illegally obtained that evidence in my house, that evidence cannot be used. So the government is punished if the police act illegally. So that encourages the police and law enforcement to act within the rules, because they know if they don't receive a warrant or don't abide by the rules, the evidence that they find can't be used. So they want to make sure that they have a warrant and they're doing things properly. Yes. No, so that's a good question. So they, oftentimes in the US, people find it to be annoying to be on a jury. So they don't, some people like it. I've always want to be on a jury, but some people don't like it. So, but everyone gets a notice in the mail based on your address, and it asks you to come to court, and everyone will sit in a big room like this, and you'll get a number, and you'll go, and by number, you'll go and sit in a courtroom. And in the courtroom, the government, the prosecutors, and the defendants can ask each juror questions. So they ask, what type of work do you do? How old are you? How far have you studied? Who lives in your house? What books do you like to read? What TV do you like to watch? Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever had engagement with the police before? Do you have any bad opinions about the police? Do you have bad opinions about people that look like the defendant? And so based on the person's answers to the questions, the government and the defendant will decide if they want to say, no, I don't want that juror. So then they will, go ahead. You can ask in Bahasa if that's easier.
Yes, silakan pakai bahasa Indonesia nggak apa-apa, pede aja. Saya terjemahkan.
What if being a jury is a priority? Like, if you are chosen to be a jury, is it the highest priority? I mean, each people has their activity. I mean, do they have to deny their activity in order to be the jury, or they can say that no, I can't be the jury, even though the court say you will be jury.
So there are some activities where the judge will say, you are excused, you don't have to be in a jury. So if you have a job, like if you are a teacher, and the teacher says, I cannot find someone to be the substitute for me if the trial, so for example, last year I had a trial that was 3 months long. And so the jury on that trial sat for 3 months. They couldn't go to work for 3 months. They had to come to the court every day for 3 months. And so in the United States, jury duty is required. And so your employer, your boss, has to let you go to jury duty. But when you are selected, if you already have vacation tickets, you have a plane ticket to go and visit your mother in Europe or somewhere else, you can tell the judge, I've purchased plane tickets. It comes in the middle of this trial. I won't be able to be there. And the judge will excuse you because the jury has to be there for the whole length of the trial. They have to hear all of the evidence. And it's not until the very end that they decide what their decision is. So they have to hear everything. So if no one can be missing in the middle. Does that make sense? Okay. Warrant?
The warrant is physical or electronic?
It is physical still. So
Still.
it's both. The warrant, so here, actually, Pak, can you go to 2 more slides and I can guess. So this is generally how a criminal case will happen. It starts with the investigation, and then there's the indictment or the charging. An arraignment means the defendant comes to court and is told what the charges are. And then there are pre-trial, which I'll explain, and then there's trial. And if the defendant is convicted, then there's sentencing. And then after sentencing, the defendant can appeal. But like I said, if the defendant wins at trial and is acquitted and found not guilty, there's no appeal because the government cannot appeal. So the warrant, Pak, comes between the investigation and the indictment. And in my court, the warrant is electronic. I will get the warrant from the court and I will send it to the agents by email electronically, but they will print the warrant. And physically, they have to show, if it's a search warrant, they have to leave a copy of the search warrant at the home where they searched. Because another thing they have to do is they have to write everything and say what they took. So if you go into a house and they're doing a fraud case, in the warrant, they will ask for permission to take the computers in the house because you want defendants who are doing fraud often are using computers, right? To do fraudulent crimes. So the investigators will want to take the computers. They will want to take cabinets. They'll want to take all the papers. So in the warrant, they will leave in the home, they will write down, I went into the main bedroom, I took the laptop that was under the bed, I took the desktop that was on the desk. There was 2 cell phones in the drawer, I took both cell phones. There was another cabinet that had 3 boxes of paper. I took all of that paper. They'll write everything down and they'll leave that paper at the home. So it's paper. Yeah. Oops. Sorry. So the investigation. So there's 2 types of cases. Cases where we'll use the FBI as an example. The FBI also falls under the Department of Justice. So I work very closely with FBI agents, and they'll either, like, a citizen will call and say, hey, something is happening in the house next door. I think they're selling drugs. And so the FBI can open an investigation, and that is considered a proactive investigation. A reactive investigation is if the police is walking down the street and they see someone get robbed and they immediately arrest the robber. That's reactive. They are reacting to the crime happening. So it's 2 different types of investigations, no? So the proactive case, in the US, the FBI agent will come to the prosecutor, will come to my office and say, we have a tip. Someone said that their neighbors are selling drugs from their house. So we will work together to figure out what evidence they need to be able to charge a narcotics case. So we can help them get search warrants. We can get court orders to get information. So in the US, similar to here, but in a little bit different ways, we can get what's called a wiretap. Have you guys heard of do you know what a wiretap is? Anyone heard of a wiretap?
Tahu istilah wiretap?
Where the government can listen to your phone calls.
Ya, rekaman suara. Yeah.
So in the US, you have to write a long application. They're usually like 100 pages. The prosecutor and the agent will write it together, and they have to explain to a judge, we have done surveillance. We have used confidential informants, people who are telling about the defendant. We have gone through the defendant's garbage and looked and seen if we could find any evidence that way. We have tried to buy drugs secretly using undercover officers. We've done all of these different things, but we still are not able to get the evidence we need. So therefore, judge, we need your permission to get a wiretap. And then the judge will give you permission to put a tap on someone's phone. And with a wiretap, the government can listen on one particular phone number for any criminal activity. So with the house next door, where the neighbor is selling drugs in that example, the agents will then listen to the phone calls made to that house phone. So if they've done a search warrant and they didn't find anything, maybe then they will listen to the phone and they'll hear, oh, it sounds like they're setting up drug deals on the phone calls. So then they will do surveillance at the same time as so if, say they're listening to the phone calls, and in one of the phone calls, someone calls the bad guy and he says, okay, tomorrow I'm going to come and I want 3 kilos. I'll pay you $90,000. So the agent will then say, Ibu Kavita, we listened to a phone call. It sounds like someone is going to buy 3 kilos of illegal narcotics tomorrow. We want to do surveillance. And if there's actually a narcotics deal happening, we want to do an arrest. So then the agents and the prosecutors will talk and they'll say, okay, do you have enough evidence? Do you know if this is the right person? How do you know that it's going to be illegal narcotics? And the prosecutors and the agents will talk about all of the different evidence that they need to bring a narcotics charge. And if we decide that, yes, you have enough evidence, then the following day, they will go and say they watch and see if someone comes to the house at the time that they said on the phone call. And at 3 p.m., a car comes, someone goes into the house, they go in with a bag that looks like it's full of something heavy. They go into the house and they come out, the bag looks empty. and they're looking around suspiciously, then the agents will then, they can stop the car. They can then search the car, because there are different exceptions for searching a car. So sometimes you don't need a warrant. And if they find drugs in the car, they can arrest that person. And then they can also arrest the person in the house, the bad guy that they were originally trying to target. Once they arrest them, then we go to what's called a grand jury. And the grand jury is different in the US than here in Indonesia. You don't have the grand jury system here, I don't think. So the grand jury, it's not the same jury that you see in trials. It's a different jury. The jury in trials is called a petit jury, which is a small jury. The grand jury is at least 16 people. It's usually up to 20. They are secret. No one knows their names. No one knows who they are. In my district in Chicago, the jury comes for 18 months, 1 day a week for 18 months. They come and they hear the prosecutor gives them all of the information and all of the evidence that we have collected about a case. And at the end of our presentation, we ask the grand jury if they think there is sufficient evidence to charge someone. So in the example of the drug case, I would go to the grand jury and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is the evidence we have. The witness is the agent. The agent will explain that we listened to these phone calls. The phone calls, they said X, Y, and Z. They ordered this amount of drugs. They said it was this amount of money. We then did surveillance. We saw these things. Sometimes we'll show photographs, show the video from the surveillance. And then the agent will explain, we then stopped the car. In the car, we found drugs. We then went into the house. We searched the house. And in the house, we found the money that the other individual had brought. And so we'll present this evidence to the grand jury and we'll ask the jury to return the charges, which are called an indictment. So then that's what happens in the grand jury. Once the indictment happens, then the defendant has been charged. So then they have to come to court and we have to tell them what the charges are. So in the example of the drug case, we'll tell the defendant, you have been charged with, the criminal code is Title 21, United States Code, Section 841, meaning that you've been charged with a federal narcotics crime. And so we'll tell them that you have been charged with selling 100 grams of cocaine, which in the United States, if you sell 100 grams of cocaine and you are convicted, you receive a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years. So they are notified of the charge, and then we have to give all of the evidence, copies of all of the photographs from the surveillance, copies of any videos, copies of all of the recordings from the wiretap phone calls. All of the agents have to write reports of everything they saw, everything that they found in the house, any photographs they took. The government has to give copies of all of that to the defendant and to the defendant's lawyer. And it's at the arraignment that the defendant can say, I can't afford a lawyer. Can I have a lawyer, and ask the judge? And the judge will then appoint a lawyer. So all of the materials, all of the evidence is given to the defendant and the defendant's lawyer, and they're allowed to review everything. And then the defendant and his lawyer can decide to file what are called pretrial motions. So before the trial happens, the lawyer can look through the evidence and say, Ibu Kavita, I'm reading the reports from the agents, and it looks like they didn't get a warrant to search the house. I know you found $90,000 in the house, but the agents did not have permission to go into the house. So the defendant and his lawyer can file a motion with the judge and say, Judge, the agent in this case did not have a warrant or permission to go into the house, so we would ask you to exclude the money that you have found in the house, meaning the government cannot use that money as evidence in our case. So then the judge will review that motion and they'll decide if that evidence can come in or not. Similarly, the defendant can file a motion to dismiss. They can say this charge is completely wrong, and they can lay out the legal basis, and the judge will then decide if the case has to be dismissed or if it can continue. Motions to compel means they can ask, they can say, I see in the reports that that the agents also took multiple photographs in the house. They have not turned over the photographs. We want to compel them to turn the photographs over. So the judge can say, yes, you should turn the photographs over, or no, they do not have to turn the photographs. So these are all motions, these are all requests that the defendant can make to the judge before they even come to trial. So a guilty plea. Is this a system that exists in Indonesia? If a defendant is arrested in Indonesia, can they say, yes, Pak, I did it. I am guilty? Can someone do that in Indonesia?
Bisa nggak di Indonesia ketika seseorang ditangkap kemudian mengatakan, ya saya bersalah gitu?
Who says yes? Raise your hand. Dua. Who says no? There is no guilty plea in Indonesia. Who says no? I don't understand what this Ibu is saying. So there's no system of guilty plea in Indonesia. In the US, a defendant in the US, if a defendant says, yes, I did sell those 3 kilograms of narcotics, I wish to plead guilty, the judge will then have a hearing and the defendant will explain what they did. The judge will explain all of the rights and say, you're allowed to plead guilty if you wish to plead guilty, but you don't have to. No one can compel you. But then the defendant can say, yes, I did it, I'm guilty, and then there's no trial. They're convicted. So then well before the 70 days, they can quickly say, I did this crime, I wish to receive my sentence and begin to serve my sentence. That system, from what I understand, in Indonesia does not exist. If someone is arrested and charged in Indonesia in the criminal system, you must go to trial. There's no system to plead guilty here. If you choose, yes.
Thank you. So I just have 2 questions. If you plead guilty at court, is there a reward for doing that? For example, getting a lesser sentencing. So in the example that you used, you would say they would get 5 years, but if they plead guilty, they might get 3, and then or something like that. And then my second question is there a process for people who they've pleaded guilty, but then they've actually changed their mind and they want to come back and say, no, I'm not guilty and I want a process. Is it possible to do that?
Take it back.
Yeah.
So to your first question, yes. If you plead guilty, you get credit for what is called acceptance of responsibility. So you're saying that, yes, I'm accepting that I'm responsible for this crime. So the judge then can give you a reduced sentence because you've accepted responsibility. To your second question, there are very few exceptions, but usually no. Once you have pleaded guilty, you can't take it back. So there's no changing your mind. There are some very limited exceptions, like if you didn't understand the charges, or you had a very bad attorney, or you didn't understand that you were actually pleading guilty, then you can take back the change of plea. But usually when you go to a change of plea, it usually takes like 45 minutes to an hour. And the judge will explain, you know that you don't have to plead guilty. If you don't plead guilty, you have the right to a trial. At a trial, you will have the right to pick 12 people who you can question and make sure that they are fair. If you have a trial, you know you have the right to question the witnesses. You have the right to see the evidence. And the judge will explain each of your rights. And after the defendant has heard all of their rights, if they still choose to plead guilty, then they can do so. And they also will hear the full charges. And they'll also hear what the government says that they did. So in the example of the drug dealer in the house next door, in a hearing, the change of plea hearing, I would stand up as the prosecutor and I would say, Your Honor, if the government's case was to go to trial, we would prove that Mr. X was dealing cocaine from his house and he sold on December 27th of 2019. He sold through 3 kilograms of cocaine to individual A for $90,000. And then the judge will ask the defendant, Mr. X, did you hear what the prosecutor said? Is that what in fact you did? And the defendant has to say yes or no. And if the defendant says yes, yes, I understood what the prosecutor said. This is what I did. I in fact am guilty of this crime. Then the judge will say, I accept your plea. You're now considered convicted of that narcotics offense.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
That was a great explanation.
What else? Fuck, am I going too long?
Yeah, I think in 15 minutes.
Okay, we'll do trial really fast. Okay, so this is what happens in a trial. So voir dire, I think these 2 slides are maybe backwards, so let me move it one. Okay, so voir dire, I think you asked about how the jury is picked. So the jury is, you want 12 people. So usually so in one trial, the trial I had last year, we had 500 people come. And they come individual, so it wasn't all at once. So we do 50 people at a time. 50 people would come into the room and the judge would individually ask each person, what is your name? Where did you go to school? How much school do you have? What do you do for work? What are your interests? What are your hobbies? And we would write down all of their answers. And then the judge at the end of maybe an hour would say, okay, we've questioned 15 people. You now know all of their answers. Government, is there anyone from those 15 people that you do not want to be on the jury because you don't think they're fair? And we'll write down on a piece of paper and we'll say juror number 6, juror number 12, and juror number 15, we don't think are fair. The judge will also ask the defendant and defendant's lawyers, defendant, is there anyone you don't think is fair? And they'll say, we don't think juror number 7, juror number 11, and juror number 16 are fair. Each side gets a certain number of challenges. So the government gets 10 and the defendant will get say 12. And that means that no question, the judge can't ask any questions. The government can say 10 people from this pool, I don't want on my jury. The defendant can say 12 people from this pool, I don't want on my jury. The only reasons that either side cannot use are race, sex, religion, sexual orientation, and I'm missing one. There are 5 reasons. So you can't strike people from a jury because they are all Buddhist. You can't strike people from a jury because they are all Latino. You can't say, I don't want this person on a jury because they are homosexual. So for those 5 different reasons are not appropriate reasons, but otherwise you can say that person was sleeping during the voir dire. That means that they're not going to be able to pay attention in a 3-month trial. So you can say, judge, we want to remove juror number 15 because they were sleeping during the entire thing. Once the jury is picked, then we'll go back one buck. Oh no, we go backwards, back, yeah. Once the jury is picked, then this is the order of how a trial happens. So you'll have both sides get opening statements. So the prosecution will explain the government's case, then the defendant's lawyer will stand up and explain the defendant's case. And then one thing that is very important in criminal cases in the United States is that the government always has the burden to prove that the defendant is guilty. So all the way from the beginning of the trial up until the jury goes to the back room to decide, the presumption, the assumption is that the defendant is innocent. So the jury is told every day, the judge tells them, the defendant is innocent until you hear all of the evidence in the case. Which means that the government, the prosecutors, has the burden to prove, and we use the phrase in the United States, our burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. So has anyone heard of that phrase before? So that means that the government has to show beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. X sold 3 kilograms of narcotics on December 19th of 2019. So we have to show enough evidence to the jury for them to find that the defendant, beyond a reasonable doubt, committed the crime that they are accused of. So we'll put on the evidence at trial. So at trial, you can play the wiretap phone calls that the agents recorded. You can have the agent come to the house or you'll come to the trial and explain, we searched the house, this is what we found. You can bring the drugs into the courtroom and say, this is what we found inside the courtroom. Then the trial happens. And then at the end of the trial, we give what are called closing statements. The government will summarize all of the evidence and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is why the defendant should be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt because of all of this evidence that we presented during trial. The defendant can then give a closing argument and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, these are all of the reasons why the defendant is not guilty. They weren't home at the time that the drug deal happened, that multiple people used the phone in that house. The drugs weren't drugs. The chemist made a mistake. So that wasn't 3 kilograms of cocaine, it was 3 kilograms of baby powder, something. So, right, so the defendants can also make an argument and say the government has not met their burden. The jury then can take all of the evidence, not the drugs. They can take everything else back to the jury room and then they decide. They decide whether or not the defendant is guilty or not guilty. They then come back, and if they find the defendant guilty, then the judge sentences the defendant. In the US, the government will make a recommendation, the defendant will make the defense counsel, defendant's lawyer will make a recommendation, but ultimately the judge is the one who decides. So the judge will decide this person is found guilty of dealing 3 kilograms of narcotics, they should receive 10 years in prison. Once the sentence has been imposed, then the defendant can appeal. So they can go to the Court of Appeals and say, these were all of the errors that were made in my trial. This is why the sentence is not fair. And they can ask the Court of Appeals to overturn the conviction or to reduce the sentence. And if the Court of Appeals says, no, everything was done properly, then the sentence stands and the defendant has to serve the 10-year sentence. If the Court of Appeals agrees with the defendant, the case will then come back to the trial court. Sometimes it means a new trial has to happen. They will find that some very bad error was made. And so a new trial will have to happen, or the court will say the sentence was not proper. The judge has to redo the sentencing. So some part of it can have to be redone. And then that's it. That's the end of a criminal trial. So yes.
Defendant's lawyer tried to bribe the judges to release the defendant.
So there is some laughter, but yes. So there was a very big case in Chicago in the 1980s. So well before you were born. In the 1980s, where many judges in Cook County, which is where Chicago is, were receiving bribes from defense attorneys. And so they would give lower sentences, or they would, remember how I said that the defendant can file a motion to say the evidence should be excluded? So defendants would give bribes and the judge would say that evidence should be excluded. And so then the government would have to dismiss the case. Those judges were all charged in a federal corruption case. because the FBI investigated all of those judges and they found a lawyer who became a confidential informant and he wore a wire and he recorded the judges and they gathered all of this information. They then did wiretaps on the judges and they had recorded phone calls of the judges receiving bribes in their offices. So then those judges were then charged and convicted. So yes, it does happen. In that case, at least, we caught the judges, but it happens. It happens in the US as well.
So thank you. I think we
So
almost
I'm
close.
I'm going to skip all this. I'm just going to show
Okay.
these last two things. The
Oh,
embassy asked me,
nice.
so these are the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative. It's a program that the embassy does between 18 and 35 years old. Students, so I believe everyone here, right, between 18 and 35 years old. It's a program where students can, I believe, travel to the US, Ibu Ade, is that correct? So Yisili, and they do, it's academic fellowships, professional fellowships. The QR code, I think, should work, hopefully.
Ya, silakan di-scan QR code-nya. Siapa tahu besok terseleksi untuk bisa ke Amerika Serikat mengikuti pemimpin Asia Tenggara Muda inisiatif.
Then I will just go to
Yeah.
the last slide, Pak, and that has the QR
Yeah.
code for the embassy,
Ya.
which has information about the foreign student intern program.
Mhm.
So if students are interested in being
Ya,
interns at the US Embassy,
ya kalau
there's
ingin
information on the website ID is there as well, or you can use the QR code because you
Yeah.
are all younger than me and know how to do that.
ya saya kalau nanti kita support ya Bu Aroma kalau ada yang mau magang di kantor Kedutaan Besar Amerika Serikat silahkan bisa di klik linknya. So if you would like to have internship in the United States, I think instead of attending the internship in Pusdiklat in Mandiri, a regular internship, you can also join this as well, and we will convert it as 2 credits of internship. Jadi silahkan bisa ambil pemagangan di kantor Kedutaan Amerika Serikat, mungkin 1 bulan, 2 bulan gitu. Terus setelah itu nanti SKS-nya bisa kita konversikan menjadi 2 SKS. Okay,
Pak,
I
we have
think-
time for questions?
I think it's
Time?
okay. Just 2 minutes. If only one, just only for one question, just only one. You can select.
Oh, no.
Oh man,
Adek, we didn't hear from, yeah,
yeah.
yes, you,
Yes, you.
yes.
Do you have the microphone?
Oh.
Okay, can you? Oh no, that one. Okay. Name and directly to the question.
Okay. I will introduce my name. My name is Ridho Ifran Adiasar. And my question is about the point of double jeopardy, hukuman ganda tadi yang tentang itu.
Double jeopardy.
Yeah, double
Yes.
jeopardy. And my question is, what if the defendant repeats his or her crime act? Is he gonna be free, literally free, or what?
Yes,
So-
if the defendant is acquitted. So my very first trial as a prosecutor, the defendant was charged with a narcotics case. And in that case, the judge excluded, we found, I believe, money in the garage. And the judge said that, no, that was the way the agents found the money was illegal. So he said, no, you can't use that evidence. One of our main witnesses fled to Mexico, so we couldn't find him. So when we presented the trial, the jury said, no, that was not enough evidence, that the government did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that defendant had committed the crime. So the defendant was acquitted. So as soon as the jury came back and said not guilty, the defendant was allowed to leave the courtroom. He's done. He's free.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you. I think we do not have any time again, but it seems that we will have you again. So if you are around in the city again, just please let us know so you can
course,
have
Pak.
another meeting with our student. It was very nice and very excellent presentation from you. And most of the students are taking the class of introduction of legal science. So this will make them understand well comparatively not only Indonesian legal system but also American legal system. Who knows, maybe next week Mr. Bruce will come, and Bu Ade, you can tell to Mr. Bruce just to drop me an email or text if he would like to come in the next session. So thank you again, Ibu Kavita, and give applause again to Ibu Kavita. Ya, luar biasa. Setelah ini saya persilahkan mahasiswa nanti bisa absen di depan, dan before we close the session, I think we have souvenir. Oke, sudah ya. Oke. We have a little souvenir for you. Let's close our session by reciting Hamdalah together. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Safe trip back home and stay healthy. Goodbye.